If your goal is to get the most out of your training, then I would recommend buying an ELMS from G-Sight. And I've talked about this in past videos. I've had tips about them. I have talked about their training value a good amount because I'm a firm believer in the system. And I'm even a firm believer over the cert gun. I believe that this actually adds more training value for those of you who are interested. So we're going to go over a few things, pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, and I'm just going to talk about the way to integrate it into your system first. So first things first, and why it's effective. So first things first, dry fire. This allows you to do a lot of things like reload practice and stuff like that. That's really authentic to the concept you're going to have to use. So you're using snap caps that can be inserted. The ELMS is different. It just stays in your chamber. So this will allow you to do things with other types of snap caps and also rounding off those big movements that you're going to have at first, working with like a double action, single action, being the first time using a gun. This will allow you to polish out and analyze and polish out all those big movements, like when you're doing drills that we'll cover in this video. I would recommend doing some of these drills dry before you use the ELMS, because the ELMS has batteries in it, but it's also, if you're having a lot of movement, you don't need the ELMS if you can actually identify through dry fire. You already know where you're at. The ELMS is a confirmation pre-range, a pre-range confirmation in my view, because it will show you, just as a bullet would, it'll show you, or pretty close, what is happening with your firearm. So it's not necessarily a cert gun, which will be aligned a bit different than an actual firearm, depending on the ammunition and everything, but it's not going to be all that much off. It's going to show you what's happening with your specific firearm, and it's able to replicate things that the cert gun cannot do. And also, it's going to verify some of those concepts with the trigger system and your interaction with that trigger system and that firearm's grip and everything else, weight and all that good stuff, and balance or whatever. So the ELMS adds that training value, so you don't need to go to the range just to see what's going to happen and see if you add any movements. This will give you that training, and then you can actually use the ELMS continuously or go back to dry fire if you notice that there is a problem. Instead of going to the range and either reinforcing bad habits or just getting frustrated that you're using up money, this is a great investment in my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about some pros and cons between the ELMS and the cert gun. As far as the advantages and disadvantages of the system, they can either be significant to your level of training and how you would be affected by certain characteristics, however, also how your body would be affected by certain characteristics, because you can be lulled into a false feeling of proficiency. And like a lot of people will talk about using a 22 for training value, however, when you're, again, there's neurological things that are happening when you're using a 22 for training that I've seen failure to cross over. Because you're getting some recoil, but not much at all, not much more than a pellet gun, you're actually getting a problem when you go to other calibers. Now, the same thing goes with this. If you are not familiar with the grip that you are responsible for having, and also the twitching that you're going to have to perform, some people can actually be very, I would say that they get into a false sense of not needing to actually make corrections. Now, that needs to be an independent skill that, unfortunately, I think is only really developable at the range. So, the ELMS allows you to segregate those skills and drills, and it doesn't allow you the multiple shots that the cert gun allows. So you can simulate getting used to shooting as many rounds as necessary with visual reference, like on lasers, a random amount needing to be used. There's other guns out there that are like the laser training company, Laser Trainer, I think that's just their name, but they allow multiple shots and they have target systems, and I tested them a long time ago. It was a great training system, however, it just lacks some other qualities. It's very similar to the cert gun. However, you get multiple shots. Now, again, when you're actually going through a firing sequence, you do have recoil in between. And so what you could do with a cert gun would be what I would consider a burnout, where you actually see how long you can pull the trigger without moving the gun as fast as you can. Now, this can cause trigger finger burnout, which can cause hypertrophy to the muscles that are being used and reinforce those tendons for tension's sake and stuff like that, which is absolutely good. However, that concept needs to be treated more like a workout, in my opinion, rather than training for the shooting skills that are going to be needed for self-defense or use of a firearm, which is most of the intent is self-defense. So anyways, next is price. So price, it's your investment. So are you investing in a SIRT gun because it's going to give you more advantages? I don't think you're really getting more advantages with the SIRT gun over the ELMS. Now, if you were to just buy the laser, they're typically around $70. There are often sales, and Black Friday is a great time. It's coming up, so check that out. But $200, around $200, you're looking at about 1,000 rounds worth of ammo. But again, there are some issues, and the next part is genuine trigger. You're using the firearm and the caliber that you're actually going to be using, and you stick it in, you stick the laser in, and you get to use your real firearm. You get the real trigger pull, the real grip, and everything else. With the SIRT guns, they've obviously had a good effect on some people, in the sense that you get to use a gun that's very similar, but it's been an introduction to laser training, and it's very close to the grip, and it has kind of a mushy trigger pull. I never was really all that impressed with it, but it didn't really replicate any real trigger system all that accurately, so you do get a drawback in that. It is kind of disappointing. Like the Glock system, the M&P system is probably a little closer to what the traditional M&P or even the current M&P is, where you don't necessarily feel like a wall or whatever, but you do feel a bit of resistance, gradual resistance, and then, you know, letting go. With SIRT guns, you don't necessarily get that. It's a different sensation, and it can have effect on the type of muscles you use, and even the pattern of trigger work that you have. So it's not really familiar to anything on the market, but it is close. But you get to use your sights, and also it shows you the genuine impact in relation to your sighting system. So if your sights are a little bit off, but you're not going to adjust them, or you're just initially getting that firearm, you get to see the results of a mechanically aligned laser that is showing you the path from the bore. Now, this typically close ranges, of course, we have ballistics, and some things are going to be a little bit different. However, most of the time you're actually following the bore. So if you have ballistics, it's usually the weight and powder charge that can differ, but you're getting a very good close representation of what's going to happen at close ranges, which is typically what you're finding in firearms usage. But ironing out not having very much movement at close ranges will typically help you in further ranges as well, from my experience. So the next thing is both of these are safe. However, again, these two combined is the biggest deal. So yes, you could identify that it's a SIRT gun, and less people are going to crap themselves when they see you using it. However, the principles of not pointing your gun at anything you not intend to shoot, that still applies, but you get good training value in that you're getting experience with that firearm, you're getting visual feedback, but it's also safe. So you can't really screw up. Once that laser is inserted, you can't screw up and just rack around in there. You could try. You can't even insert snap caps, so you're not going to get reload and then reload drills or whatever. That's typically a SIRT gun thing, and that's where some of the training value goes in. So I'm not saying that SIRT guns are useless. They have their place, but the problem is that it's kind of subjective to the drill that you're doing. However, most of the stuff that you want to do could be done with snap caps, and then the ELMS can show you what your trigger pull is doing. And again, you can replicate that by having the gun going through the reload process, and then pretending to do the reload process, and then pulling the trigger without moving the gun as fast as possible. You can always micro and replicate this stuff. So anyways, let's go ahead and move on to some drills. I apologize that this video has been so long, but bear with me. I'm going to go through this as fast as possible. So some drills you can do with the ELMS that's going to be very unique is, obviously, you're authentically going to see what happens when you pull the trigger, so your sight to bore alignment is going to be very crucial, and the app can actually help you track this. So even if you don't see where the laser is, you're not wasting that time and training value out of that, and you're going to be able to see what happened with each round. So it'll show you the first round, second round, third round, where you were messing up, because you might see that you were fatiguing at some point or not focusing. So this can be multiple avenues of training value. Trigger drill is the first one that I would bring people in, because this is the part where you actually have to apply all the skills and components of shooting relative to the situation. And most of the time what's going to happen, whether you're drawing, transitioning, whatever the case may be, transitioning from target to target, is you're going to get your sights on, and you're going to pull the trigger without moving the gun. Now, you can use the shot timer for this, or you can try to imagine a visual feedback of somebody charging or what have you, where you're actually responding to visual stimuli, because normally in the real world we're not getting audible stimuli. We're not necessarily reacting to audible feedback, we're responding to threats coming from visual feedback. So you can train with a partner for this, twisting targets showing up, or whatever the case may be. So the trigger drill is fingers straighten off the trigger, and whether you want a shot timer or whatever your stimuli is, pull the trigger as fast as you can without moving the gun. Now, a lot of people will talk about how you want a shot timer for this. That's fine. You can do audible, audio-based stimuli in order for initiation. That's fine. However, again, you're not getting that visual reference, and it's kind of difficult to time that anyways. But I guess if you're staying within 0.25 of a second, that's pretty good. So for control, I would say just a little bit longer than the trigger drill on time if you're going to time it out. However, this is where kind of the timer would actually come in handy, because it's not necessarily going to hurt, because this is where you're replicating recoil, like the muzzle flip, and you're just snapping down. Now, you're not lifting up. You're actually just canting the wrist for muzzle flip, and typically they'll tell you to rest during your trigger pull. I don't do rest. I actually will squeeze, but I will still get muzzle flip, and that's fine, and I will still bring it back down. We're obsessed with control, so this is all about control. This is where a lot of people will throw their gun, or whatever the case may be, mixing up the process of controlling the gun before the trigger pulls, that last minute grip idea. So this kind of trains you out of it. So gets you in line to where you're actually flinching right back on target, or snapping right back on target. This is a big deal. So anyways, next one. I wouldn't necessarily control this one. This is more for muscle memory, for organizing your process, for controlling the gun after the trigger is pulled. Of course, having a competent grip, a sharp amount of force being applied, and crushing grip. So for transition, working from target to target, so what I would do is I would have the recoil, and then analyze, because that's where a lot of people get it wrong, is they'll scan for targets or sense a target, and they'll be pulling the trigger, and then they'll go over without actually confirming that that target is done. Now, of course, there are situations where it would be interrupted, where you would actually be putting rounds on there, and then you'll have to sacrifice so you can have time. You won't have time being a punishment by having an adversary or a score being counted against you because you could have engaged after your shot sequence, or this one took more priority, whatever the case may be. So anyways, sorry, poor choice of words, but for transition, I would actually, you can either have it pointing straight on as an analysis, and then going over to the other one, shooting and analyzing, or as you could combine these two processes, where you actually will snap back on target, and instead of having the trigger pull, you analyze it. So let recoil happen, you imitate recoil happening, analyzation, identification, transfer. Now, there are different methods for this. Practice whatever method, whether it's peripheral acquisition of the target and then drawing it over, but typically eyes to target is the best way to go in some circumstances. Depends on range and all this other stuff. But anyways, figure it out, organize it accordingly. Now the draw, obviously it's important to get that first shot on target. This can absolutely affect the tempo of the other shots or the outcome of the follow-on shots, because if it's an actual misalignment of the gun, where you're actually off, as in this, instead of just having an angle off, that could be corrected during recoil, or might just snap right back to where it's supposed to be under recoil. That's something that you need to organize beforehand and actually micro beforehand. Now, of course, it could be initiated with a shot timer or something, or what you could have done is you could have a visual reference and just go off of that, or go through your process of response to visual stimuli. So whatever the case may be, you can practice your draw and do it as fast as you can, for whatever way that you wish to do so. Like prepping for competition, shot timers. If you're prepping for self-defense, you probably want a visual stimuli, or at least visualized. So, with all that said, that is the drills that I would recommend, and I know this was a relatively long video. There's a lot to cover because this is actually a very important inclusion into your training system, and it can vastly improve your skills. And when you get to the range and you do everything, or you verify everything that you have practiced and drilled, this is a way where you can actually drill, and you can put yourself through different courses of fire, or you could replicate these drills on the range and see if you can actually replicate it, or if recoil kind of throws you off a little bit. Now, the range is really for training for follow-on shots and verifying that you're still capable of that, but typically follow-on shots are still basically just the trigger drill at a shorter distance. And you can do trigger drill where, as I said, pin to the rear, you charge the striker or hammer, or the gun in general, right there, and then with the trigger to the rear, and then you test your ability to go out as fast as possible and then pull the trigger without moving the gun. There are many different options in order to micro this. Going with a SIRT gun is not necessarily going to be advantageous in this because, again, trigger's going to be different. I get that you could do burnout, which is great, and burnout is actually a good thing for being able to pull the trigger without moving the gun for a longer bit of time. However, when you're fighting recoil and you're having to constantly twitch downwards, the only way I could actually see that happening is you're adding in an artificial twitch, but then you'd have to bring it back up or just try to go at a consistent base for, you know, each target and having a stack of targets and moving downwards. But again, that totally throws you off from reality, right? Because you're not walking down necessarily. So with that said, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and any ideas you might have for microing skills, whatever I talked about. So anyways, I appreciate it. You guys have a good one.